Ladies and gentlemen, here they come. The kings of the sport, Top Fuel Dragsters.
These are Top Fuel Dragsters. They're drag racing's ultimate speed machines. The basic concept of run what you brung carried to its technological, innovative extreme. The AA Dragster story can be summarized by necessity is the mother of invention. The need to go quicker and quicker, faster and faster. The Top Fuel Dragster story begins on California's dry lakes, where hot rodders in search of more power soon discovered the fuel additive nitromethane for that extra boost. The next step was the development of the dragster itself.
Well, we just recently at the Museum of Drag Racing picked up a car that I think is very important to the history of the sport. It's Dick Craft's Bug. This is the original dragster where the name Rails came from. Dick was racing at the Dry Lakes in the 40s, and he had a Roadster, 27T Roadster, and then when they opened the track up at Santa Ana, he was the very first one of the fellas to show up and race here with his Roadster. So one day, Craft shows up at the track without the body on the thing. It's just the engine and the Model T rails. Well, they wouldn't let him run in the class. They said it was unfair. But they did let him make a time run. And of course, the car went quicker and faster than the rest of the Roadsters. So the following week, 4 or 5 of the other cars showed up without the bodies. And this is the beginning of the rails. They made a rail class. Now, pictures of this car began to show up in the magazines around the country. And I saw one of them, and I had a 27T Roadster, so I immediately pulled the body off of mine, and that was my first dragster. Now, this is about 1953.
By the mid-50s, The combination of nitromethane and dragsters produced a class of cars capable of running over 160 miles per hour. The promise of even greater speeds was an attractive lure to racers across the country.
I guess it's just trying to go as fast as you possibly can. First thing, we went into a gas dragster, and that wasn't fast enough, so we ended up going into fuel, which we heard about. It would probably get your car down the racetrack a little faster. At first, when we started out with fuel, we started out with 75%, which you could buy that. And then as we found out what to do with that, we ended up going to 100%. And through time and playing around, we found out we could burn anywhere from 80 to 100% pretty easy, which with the right compression and things and learning what to do with it got us down the racetrack.
In 1957, Don Garlits laid claim to his first performance record, running 176 miles per hour in Swamp Rat 1 at a track in Florida.
The good part of it was we had the record. It really gave me something incentive. I felt that I was capable of running with any of the other cars around the country prior to this time, and I think the whole country felt this way. The only fellas that ever went fast or set records were in California, and so the Eastern cars, they didn't really try all that hard. They just felt that they would never have the good parts and they could never come up to the performance of the Californians. So when my car set this record, this was a big influence on people like Seto Postolian, the Tucson Speed Sport, lots of cars back east, Luke Angelosi. They all gave it a good shot. The bad part was they were very upset in California and got a lot of flack. Most of the magazines were printed out there in the tabloids, you know, and they would say phony times and stuff like that. Well, finally it came down to the point they sent the 3 fastest California cars back to Houston because I wouldn't come to the coast and they wouldn't come to Florida. So we met on neutral ground at Houston, Texas, and it was a really good race. I won the race, very close racing though, and this is what really started the touring of the dragsters because a lot of people came out to see that race, and so they knew that if they hired good cars, they paid everybody to show up, they could get crowds.
Speed is the benchmark by which Top Fuel dragster performance has always been measured. By 1960, drivers were approaching 200 miles per hour, led by Chris Karamessinis, the Golden Greek.
We're making changes rapidly as far as tires and different compressions. So every time we'd go out every week, we'd try a different combination, and we finally hit on a good combination, which we start running 200, and no one believed it. But everywhere we went, we start running 219, 200 from Florida to California. So after we did it for 1 year, everyone started believing that we could go over 200.
In 1963, the National Hot Rod Association rescinded a 6-year ban on the use of nitromethane at its sanctioned events and ran a 16-car field of Top Fuel dragsters at the season-opening Winter Nationals. Despite NHRA's concern for safety with the use of nitromethane, between 1957 and 1963, the popularity of Top Fuel competition had drivers looking elsewhere for racing venues.
Well, that was just when I was really getting going. I had just gotten my Chrysler. I had just built the Swamp Rat. I had just been to Cordova and raced with Cook and Vettel, and I was really caught up in it. So at that exact time, the American Hot Rod Association had been formed, and then also there was the the American Automobile Timing Association, the ATAA, which was headed by Jim Lamona, and they were putting on the World Series at Cordova. And then there was the Chester outfit headed by Bob Osiki, the International Timing Association. So there was some places to race, and they were all running fuel.
One of the most important events to start during the NHRA fuel ban was the U.S. Fuel and Gas Championship, better known as the Bakersfield March Meet. Organized by the Smokers, a local hot rod club, the first event was sort of a Woodstock of drag racing, a spontaneous happening that brought fans and racers together for a weekend. During the early 60s, the March Meet grew in stature to become one of the events of the year.
Bakersfield, pretty much at that time, in that era, was what we want to call a racer's race, okay? It was put on by a bunch of racers from Bakersfield, California, the Smokers Hot Rod Club. I mean, it goes back to Ernie Hashem and several other people that, you know, just started off with the era of the thing. That race pretty much set the precedent. The Smokers race was, I mean, it was the drag race of the century or of that year or that era. And I'm very proud to say I won the race in 1964, which really put a cap to it. And I'll never forget it. It was $3,200 for top fuel the winner of it. And that's more money than I ever saw in my life back then. I stopped having to sleep in the back of the car in the station wagon going down the road.
Well, after the race at Houston in 1958, when I beat the cars that had come back there to race me, they decided that what they needed to do was get me to come out to the West Coast, because what had happened, these cars went back west, and they said, you know, they had tremendous crowds out there for this thing. We need to get Don Garlits to the West Coast, and we'll have a big crowd out there. So the Smokers Car Club up in Bakersfield, California, put together a race, and they named it the U.S. Fuel and Gas Championships. And they advertised the race just around California, and they brought me out to race. They paid my expenses out there. When I got to Bakersfield, the first thing I encountered was Gary Cagle there at one of the little pancake houses. And he wasn't the least bit impressed with what he'd read in the papers about the performance of my car. So the first thing he says to me over breakfast, he says, "Garbage Don," he says, "how would you like to run that swamp rat out there for pink slips?" And I didn't even know what he was talking about. Later I found out a pink slip was like a title in California. He was ready to run me for the title of my car. And of course, out at the racetrack, they had beer at the event. And you could not believe the amount of beer cans that were on the ground. We'd have to push them out of the way to move the car around, and they would holler stuff out of the stands, Tampa Dan and Garbage Dan and Garbage Don. Because the car wasn't really very fancy. Remember, it was a homemade car built on 31 Chevy frame rails, so it wasn't the prettiest car. It had no chrome on it whatsoever. So the Californians weren't impressed with the car.
While many considered the March Meet the event of the year, the NHRA national races were gaining in status to top fuel drivers. In 1967, a series of events and top fuel competition at the U.S. Nationals reconfirmed its position as drag racing's premier race.
So we arrived at Indianapolis, a decisive underdog, and a little story surrounding that is interesting. Until we ran into sixes, I wasn't going to shave. And we run like 710s and 715s, but not quite making the sixes. And guys like Don Perdome were already popping 690, 695s. As it ended, it was like a Cinderella story because we worked our way through the field slowly. You know, each run was do or die because a loss was the end. And we finally got down to the final against James Warren, and we did. We ran a 6.77, which was the 100th off the absolute record. And
right after I got out of the service in 1964, I moved to California and went to work in a Chevrolet dealership. A couple of the guys there had a Top Fuel car, and I went to races with them a couple of times, and the driver they had driving the car quit, and I asked the owner if I could drive the car. That was a front engine car with a 392 Chrysler. I was fortunate enough he let me drive it, and I liked it, and I've been doing it ever since. First time I drove a rear engine car, I was quite uncomfortable in it. Considerably different than you were sitting right out in front, and the vision was there, and it just, I don't know, I couldn't describe it. In fact, didn't have real good luck with the first time with it. The car didn't handle very well, and I was ready to go back to a front motored car.
When you used to sit between the rear tires, and it was like the engine was in front of you and the tires were around you, and it was like you was in your own little cocoon there, or a little capsule, and it was a very secure feeling. But all of a sudden we're sitting out here in front of all this, and the only thing that you're really looking at is some gauges and a couple front tires out there, and it was very scary, to be truthful with you, because you didn't realize, or I didn't realize at that particular time, how much I relied from the protection of everything else in case of a mishap or an upset or something. On these rear engine cars, the first few times I drove them, I tried to drive them like I drove my front engine car. And when you're sitting over the rear tires or between the rear tires, you can let the car get out of shape and you can drive it back around, and there isn't quite a problem there. But when you move yourself up to the middle of the wheelbase, when the car moves a foot there, it's moved 4 foot at the rear wheels. And the first few times that I took a ride in my rear engine car, I like to roll the thing over. In fact, I had seriously considered not driving anymore, until a friend of mine by the name of Don Garlitz walked up and told me to put some lead in the front of my car and I'd be able to drive it. And that's all it took right then.
There have been rear-engine dragsters since the beginning of drag racing. I raced Red Chase's car in Houston in '58. The Speed Sport Roadster set the record. Even though it was a roadster, it was still a dragster. It set the record in 1957 at 169. And all up through the years, there were rear-engine cars, but they were always ill-handling, and they didn't win many races. In other words, they would make a good run, but when it came down to the actual racing, they won very few races. But in 1970, at Long Beach, California, at one of the Grand American Series races, in the final, the transmission exploded in my slingshot and it cut off part of my right foot. And while recuperating in the Pacific Coast Hospital, I drew the plans up for the conventional rear engine dragster that basically we run today. And so In 1970, throughout the fall of that year, I constructed that car and tested it and brought it to Pomona in 1971 and qualified it in the field and won the event. What I had hoped for with the rear engine car was not that it would be a winner so much. I never expected it to be so superior in performance. I hoped for a car that was just competitive, that would allow me to race a few more years in safety and perhaps some of my buddies.
The only thing I can remember of the car when I first got into Pancho's car and started driving was that the motor sounded just awful tinny because you had the helmet on and the pipes was aimed back the other way. You were a lot more used to packing rags and earplugs in your ears and your helmets and stuff, so you can finally end up with some hearing when you get older. That was the only difference I really saw in the car. In fact, the cars were fun to drive. They really were. I mean, you know, I've blown a bunch of them up and been on fire several times, and I sort of felt pretty good about the motor sitting back there. You can get ugly with the motor right now. Get a little braver with a dragster than what you do with the funny car.
But I was really totally surprised when we finally had the thing running about 2 months, and the times that it produced were far superior to anything the Slingshot could do. It opened up a whole new era for Top Fuel racing.
Populated exclusively by the safer and faster rear-engine cars, Top Fuel racing in the early 70s continued to grow, helped by an emerging group of new heroes.
I had been sportsman racing for about 10 years in Division 6 up in the Northwest, and a lot of people didn't realize that I had actually won Super Eliminator and Comp Eliminator, I think 3 different years in that in division championships. And in 1970, became partners with Ken McLean, Bob Lawrence, and started racing Top Fuel cars. Ken McLean driving. We raced it in 71, and in 72 he bought a rear-engine car and started racing it. Ken was still driving. The car wasn't going that well, and we were having a lot of trouble, and Ken decided not to drive anymore, and Bob Lawrence and we needed a driver. And I had driving experience, but not in Top Fuel cars, so I decided that I'd drive the car for a couple of weeks and see how things went. Next race, U.S. Nationals. We went there and qualified fairly well, and got a good break in the race, and went on to race Jerry Ruth in the final and got by him. And so that's how it all started. And a lot of people think it was instant success as far as Gary Beck was concerned, but not really. It was more like a 15-year overnight success.
In 1973, Gary Beck again won the U.S. Nationals. For 1974, he set his sights on a higher goal.
Well, we were getting real serious with our racing team out of Edmonton, Alberta. Ray Peets was then involved in the car, and Bob Lawrence and I still trying to campaign these things on a national tour, and we took on the challenge of a world championship. And at that time, it was division races together with national events, and we were able to start the year off right with winning the first race in Pomona, the Winter Nationals, Pomona, California, and we're able to win 4 national events along with regional races, which compiled a nice point total, and we got the World Championship trophy. So we were on our way as far as our racing career goes by that time.
got my first fuel license in a funny car in 1971. And in 1973, and I campaigned funny cars 3 solid years, not so much on the national circuit because I couldn't afford it. I did the match race circuit and was able to make it pay. In 1973, I upgraded my license. The license switch Don Garlits signed for, Tommy Ivo and Connie Coletta. I upgraded it to Top Fuel because that was my original plan of attack. That's what the class I wanted to drive. Because they are the quickest and fastest race cars in the world. And I like the challenge driving that kind of an automobile, and they are truly the kings of the sport. I didn't have too many problems in the beginning when I first got the Top Fuel license because I didn't really do anything. I ran some good numbers, but on the match race circuit, people don't usually remember it. So I kind of had to weed my way through the pack. They took me serious in 1975 when I was not a lot of luck went into it, but we still worked hard that day. I got to the final of the U.S. Nationals in Indianapolis, and I was against, Big Daddy Don Garlits, and that was incredible in 1975. It was kind of like a woman trying to play pro football and almost making it. So I think they really took me serious around 1975.
'75 was quite a year. Again, we wanted to repeat as the world champion, and Don certainly didn't want us to. And he built a new car, and he came out and he ran. He always runs very good, and we battled back and forth all year long. The points were very even all through the years, and so the stage was set for Ontario, California, and he came there, and his car ran very well. He set both ends of the national record, and went on to win the race and got back by me, and I lost that championship by a few hundred points.
Well, at that particular event, the air was real good and heavy. I had a real nice set of tires that were a little bigger than normal. Some of the tires come through just a little larger. I had the correct gear ratio in the car, and the traction that they had at that Ontario Motor Speedway then, with the way they sprayed it, was just phenomenal. And it was one of those storybook runs. The car carried the front end out past the 8th mile, never missed a beat, and it ran the 250.69 with a 563. And to give you an idea how important all those different combinations being correct are, it was a full 7 seasons before that record was broken. And that's the reason it just took that long for everything to get back right again, where the fellas could reach those kind of speeds.
If you took any 3 cars and said, this is my combination, if I gave all of my combination on the run we made today to somebody that is out here that ran 3/10 slower, they couldn't use my combination because everybody does something different. Every part has its own little personality. Every supercharger is a little bit different, even if they're both of them made by the same guy in the same day. The car has a personality that goes with the combination. The driver, the way he drives.
I think it stems right from the person that's sitting in the driver's seat and how he pushes on the pedals, to how the engine is built, to how the clutch is set, the tires are set. And we personally actually build the whole car and the combination around how I drive.
If you get the right fuel-air ratio going in that engine, it'll run at any altitude, at any track. That's basically the combination is your fuel system.
It's all these ingredients that's put together. Like, I changed the car yesterday, and I mean, we just changed small jet in it, and it didn't like it in the area that it was. There wasn't enough volume of fuel to take care of the motor. And in doing so, it hurt a piston real bad, and then it caused the rod to come out, and the rod caused the supercharger to come off, and the supercharger coming off broke a fuel line and put me on fire. So, I mean, there's a combination that you don't want to have.
In 1977, Shirley Muldowney became the first woman to win a major auto racing world championship when she clinched the NHRA Top Fuel title.
I was delighted when I won it in '77, but the ultimate was 1980. That was the one that left an impression on me. We went into 1980 with two sponsors on the car, Goodyear Tire and Rubber and Valvoline Oil. And I mean, we were hanging by our teeth, but we won the opener. We beat Connie Coletta. And we went into the final race of the year, a race called the World Finals. We were one of 4 cars that could win the World Championship. It had never ended that close at all. It always had been decided by ending. We waded through the pack, and we won the World Championship along with the race, so that added another $20,000 to the purse, and it was the ultimate day.
Shirley, the match race with Shirley always was a real good race, because even when she wasn't winning in the beginning, the people still loved it because it was a woman at the wheel of a Top Fuel dragster. And of course, she won the World Championships in 1977, and they said, well, you know, maybe it was a fluke. But when she came back in 1980 and won again, it did establish Shirley as being a premier star in Top Fuel racing. Of course, shortly thereafter, you know, they did the movie Heart Like a Wheel, and she got a tremendous amount of publicity out of all of that. So that brought the match race to a pinnacle for us. Well, I think the rivalries that were developed through the match races, it just came up through the years, and none of it would work good for a long time because the people would get tired of it. In other words, you can only do so much at a given strip so many times. And like in the beginning, the Greek was a tremendous rivalry because he was from Chicago and he was known as the Crazy Greek, not the Golden Greek, because he used to do wheel stands in the lights. And then, of course, the Swamp Rat from Florida. So that was a natural.
I imagine back in the 60s, we probably beat him quite a few times. It was back and forth. He'd be on top for a while, and then we'd come bounce back and be on top for a while. I remember one time, I think we beat him about 20, 30 straight times in a row, and he wasn't too happy about that. So it was just one of his downs deals. Well, at first, we were just barely making it. And as time went on, the more races we got, we found out that we could actually live off the race car pretty reasonable. You know, for the amount of races, I imagine back then we were around like 45 to 50 races a year, and not breaking too much stuff, we end up making money.
And then, of course, Connie Coletta, he came along later, and the Bounty Hunter, and he kind of got his rivalry going. He used to paint the names of the guys on the side of his car that he wanted outrunning. When he'd outrun them, he'd run a line through them. And that got a lot of ink. It's how you PR yourself and promote yourself.
I did a lot with Garlis, a lot with Ivo. Tommy Ivo was very prominent in touring, probably toured more. I did more match racing probably than any other racer, probably more of us now because he's been out of it for several years, but I mean, we raced a lot, did a lot of match racing. It gets to be a certain amount of agitation. It's, you know, it's a real thing sometimes, right? You can joke and stuff, but every now and then somebody, you know, you step on somebody's feel goods, and like Garlis, I mean, you beat him 2 or 3 times, and I mean, at that point in time, he don't like to get beat. I mean, he's a poor loser. It's simple as that. But I mean, he'll turn on you. I mean, I've seen him do it to Shirley. I've seen him do it to Gary Beck. I've seen him do it to Joe Amato. I've seen him do it to me. And it depends who's up and who's down. And, you know, and naturally, we fuel it as much as we can. I mean, we keep the thing going, you know. Even when they've got a little feud going with somebody else, I mean, I'm over to Shirley's camp stirring the pot, and then I run back over to Garlis an hour later and do the same thing, you know, just to make sure everything is working well.
Shirley and I, we've always PR'd our match races on the competitiveness of it. You know, I hated her, she hated me. We were going to scratch each other's eyes out at the racetrack and finally settle it in the seats of those cars. And so that really was a crowd pleaser. And the one thing that it did that none of the other match races did, it brought the women to the stands at the drag strip. Prior to that, the men had to just drag their girlfriends out there. You know, let's go out there and watch Ivo and Garlits run. But now the girls wanted to go. They were saying, let's go see Shirley beat Big Daddy. And the guys would say, they're not going to beat Big Daddy. Shirley can't beat him. And guys would tell me that they would have to wash the dishes for a month sometimes after Shirley would put me away. They'd come down to the pits and say, don't you let her beat you, Big. I've got a big bet on with my wife or my girlfriend. And so it was a very exciting period for drag racing.
Around 1980, a trend in Top Fuel racing was becoming apparent. The dragsters were losing fan and sponsor support to the newest stars of the quarter mile, funny cars. Among some of the indicators, in 1980, NHRA went from 32 cars for Top Fuel dragsters to 16 car fields for all national events. Even with the smaller fields, Top Fuel attendance at major races was down. There were several times when there were not enough dragsters to fill the program. Also, a number of major Top Fuel dragster pilots either dropped out of racing or moved into funny cars. Jeb Allen, the 1981 world champion, retired, unable to run a car. Candies and Hughes, whose car, driven by Richard Tharp in 1976, won the World Championship, parked their Top Fuel dragster in 1983 and moved into funny cars. Also in '83, one of drag racing's sanctioning bodies dropped Top Fuel dragsters completely from its events, citing economic reasons. Despite forecasts of doom and gloom for Top Fuel, there were some bright moments. One was Shirley Muldowney's third world championship in 1982. Her march to the title included several very dramatic races, including the first all-female Top Fuel final when Muldowney raced Lucille Lee at the Spring Nationals.
We went to Columbus, and something a little different happened there. I was up against a lady driver, somebody new in the sport, a lot of guts, no experience at all, but a lady I liked. Her personality and was pleasing, and like I said, she had a lot of guts, and I respected her.
Shirley beat Lee, setting low elapsed time of the race. That set the stage for the U.S. Nationals.
We went on to Indianapolis. We thumped the ground there, and it was exciting to run that quick and that fast, that consistent. Connie Coletta got in the final, and he did, in fact, have his heyday, because that was the finest showing I think Connie ever had in his career, and we put him away in the final. It was, in fact, the quickest and fastest side-by-side drag race in history. And it was a great Indy for everybody that paid for a seat. And today, that is my favorite Oscar, most favorite. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
In 1983, Gary Beck provided a few bright spots for Top Fuel. En route to winning his second world championship, Beck reset the elapsed time record twice, ending the year at the World Finals with a pair of 5.39-second runs. '84 was perhaps the low point for Top Fuel. At the Spring Nationals, only 15 cars showed up to qualify for a 16-car field. At the Summer Nationals, only 12 cars showed to run for the 16 spots. The good news in an otherwise bleak year was world champion Joe Amato. At the 1984 Gator Nationals, aided by a new rear wing design, he became the first person to go 260 miles per hour.
When we ran Alcohol Dragster, we built a wing on an alcohol car that was not as tall, but it was laid back way behind the car. And that was a copycat idea from some of the Indy type cars or the other road racing cars in this country, that if you just follow what's going on in the world and look at the people that are spending, you know, thousands of dollars on wind tunnels, you can learn a lot by what they're doing. And we put it on an alcohol car, and what happened is we mounted it the same way, we mounted it with the same size tubing, and we actually bent it off the car. So we knew we were on the right track at the time, but we never went back to do it right at that point. But we put that back in your computer chip, you know, and you log it in. You know, 5 years later, you say, you know, Timmy said, well, over the winter, let's deal with this wing. We want to try it. So we showed up at Gainesville with this wing sticking up over the top of our trailer. Everybody looked at us like we were, you know, off the wall or something. They were all laughing and everything, you know, but we went out, you know, the first run on it, I thought I was Joe Amato, the test pilot. Because, you know, if you got something that's new and innovative, you know, you've got to go out there and strap your body into this car and shoot it off one time. And, you know, you got to drive the guided missile down through there 250 plus mile an hour and hope that everything works right.
On June 29, 1984, Shirley Muldowney crashed during a qualifying attempt for the Molson Grand Nationals in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Because of her extensive leg injuries, there were doubts if she would ever walk again, let alone race.
Upon impact, the car disintegrated and I continued on down course. For a little while, they couldn't find me because they were looking for some semblance of a race car. Well, there wasn't any. There just wasn't anything left. I remember about 30 seconds after the car came to a rest at the end of the racetrack, I was awake and I was able to talk to the trauma unit and people that were trying to help me. I knew I was in a lot of trouble because I hurt so bad. I was sure both my legs and arms were broke, but they assured me that my arms were okay, other than my hand had a problem.
To many, Shirley's crash was the straw that broke Top Fuel's back. However, just a few months later at the U.S. Nationals, new life was breathed back into Top Fuel. Part of it was due to the triumphant performance of Big Daddy Don Garlits coming out of retirement to claim his 6th U.S. Nationals title in a 4-year-old race car. As exciting as Garlits' victory was, it was matched by the announcement by Joe Hrudka. president of the Mr. Gasket Company of the Krager Weld Wheel Top Fuel Classic, a season-long competition among Top Fuel drivers that would culminate in a special elimination race at the season-ending NHRA World Finals. The inaugural race was held in 1985. As 1985 drew to a close, things were beginning to look up again for the kings of the sport. Garlits had won his second world championship and seemed single-handedly to be renewing interest in Top Fuel. Plus, some new faces were starting to attract national attention.
I started racing in 1980. I raced a AA altered and a Double B funny car with my dad and kind of took over the driving chores from my dad. And we moved on to an alcohol dragster in 81 and finished 9th in 1981, and I finished 2nd in 82, and we were the world champion in 83. And in 84 in the alcohol dragster class, I was number 2, and we kind of felt like we conquered all the goals we could conquer, and that's why we moved on to Top Fuel in 1984. Every single run we make, we learn a lot, and you know, the guys that are out there beating us, I don't think they're any smarter than us. I just think they've already tried the things we've tried, and that's basically what it amounts to is, you know, the experience builds up, and we're just trying to gain some experience right now.
Darrell Gwynn's first Top Fuel victory came at the 1986 NHRA Winter Nationals.
It's very easy to win. I proved that. It's just, I mean, it is. When you're winning, it's very, very simple to win. But like when you're losing, I mean, you cannot find nothing that'll help you. I mean, it was a perfect weekend from the time we rolled in the gate. We qualified real well and ran real good first round. I mean, we just knew everything was going so picture perfect. It was, we deserved every bit of it. I'll tell you, we worked so hard on Sunday, and they rushed us between rounds during the rain and all that, and unbelievable weekend we had. After I went through the finish line, I says, well, now here's my chance to get on that mic and rattle about all these things I've been thinking about and wanting to say, and I got to that mic and I couldn't even talk. I had it all planned out and still couldn't talk, so it was that exciting to where I couldn't even hardly talk because, you know, I knew someday my first win was going to come, but I didn't realize so soon.
After retiring from football in 1984, in August really, in 84, I decided to go drag racing. So I started putting our program together and was able to buy the Dago Red operation from Frank Taylor, who has been very lenient with us and helped us through this 1 year of racing through 1985 and the first part of 1986. You're talking about winning, the difference between winning and losing. I thought the difference between winning and losing in football was very, very minute. You're talking about milliseconds here that can make you a winner or make you a loser. It's a definite profession. It's we work too hard at it to be a hobby. See this? You see this knee? You see this mud? That's a pretty boy that just likes to hang out here, and we drive up in limousines, and we don't do any work. We just get in the car, drive it, and my suit never gets dirty. No, I like very much working on the car. It's fun for me. First rounds are a lot like kickoffs of a football game. I always got nervous before the kickoff because you're thinking about the game plan, you're trying to remember plays, you're trying to think about what you're going to call the first series of downs and try to get some sort of a mental picture of what you're going to do throughout the course of the game. And realistically, when you get out there and you get the ball the first time, you just start looking at things and things start to happen. It's very similar in this sport too. First round, I'm always nervous. I hate the first round. I wish they'd just let us run second round. But getting by the first one is always the toughest because then you have a mark to go from. Then you can see how the game's going to go the rest of the day. The motor tells you, gives you the feedback that you need to know, and then you just adjust it accordingly. And if you're capable of adjusting it better than everybody else, you win.
At the 1986 NHRA Southern Nationals, Dan Pastorini made the necessary adjustments and won his first national event Oscar.
I've experienced a lot of things in my life, but there's nothing greater than winning that first national event. I was pretty excited. I jumped around. Here's a guy that played 13 years in the NFL, and I couldn't get my helmet off. Steve Evans comes over and he sticks a microphone in my face, and I'm choked up. I can't talk. I mean, I was literally crying on the inside. I was so happy and proud of our group in making the whole program work.
If Shirley's crash in 1984 seemed disastrous to the future of Top Fuel racing, her miraculous return to competition at the 1986 NHRA Winter Nationals signaled a true resurgence for the dragsters.
I wanted to go back racing for a lot of reasons. And I knew that I wouldn't walk very well, but I don't have to walk the quarter mile. All I have to do is give it some shoe, and I never lost that knack. The desire was always there, and it's even more so now. I'm having a lot of fun driving the car. I thank God, and I thank my fans, my friends, everyone that was involved with me making it back, because, yes, of course I hurt later in the day, but when I get in the car and I hear all 8 cylinders, somehow, all of a sudden, it doesn't hurt at all.
I love the competition. I love racing against my friends. I just enjoy doing it. It's fun. It's a nice relaxation, and it's a means for me to take and let down and get away from my business, come out here and enjoy and do the thing with my sons.
When we won the championship, I said to myself, well, you know, it's easy to get yourself in a rut and get overconfident. You know, you show up, just like when you win a race. You show up the next race, you say, well, I won last week, why can't I do it? Same guys, I can beat them again. Wrong.
And when you're on, it's as easy as pie. That car will do it so easy, it's almost embarrassing. And then when you're not on, it's incredible how you can get the bear on your back and never get him off.
We got an awful nice bunch of Top Fuel competitors out here to race with, and the fans are just terrific. There's unbelievable. You can't put that into words when them grandstands stand up and cheer for you when you come up there.
It's been good to me, and I've enjoyed it. There's a lot of great people out here, and the competition is demanding on us, but it's a lot of fun with a whole lot of work.
Well, I think it started out because I wanted to go racing, and then I got so interested in it. My friends throughout the country have kept me going. And the enjoyment of having people cheer you on, and it's a good sport. I've enjoyed it.
I don't know. I can't give you an actual answer on what does keep us doing it, other than the fact that we have a lot of willpower and want to do it.
I like the speed, the competition itself. That's just the type of person I am. I'm a very competitive person, and it's just something I really enjoy.
I'm having fun for not the first time in my drag racing career, but it's not so desperate like it used to be.
The dragsters always have been faster speed and ET than the funny cars or any other class. So they've just been king of the sport for that reason.
Streamlining has always been part of Top Fuel racing. Early attempts at cheating the win ranged from enclosed canopies to encasing the car in sleek bodywork. It seems appropriate that it was in 1986, with the trend towards aero shapes and high tech, that streamlining would come into its own in Top Fuel, giving birth to a new era of supercars.
About the middle of last year, we knew there was going to be a weight step up in the weight, and we've always had real light cars. So we would either had to add ballast, and we had contemplated doing some streamlining, and this kind of spurred it on. Right after the World Finals, we decided to do it. We keep our car based out of Indianapolis during the summer, so we know a lot of the teams back there and a lot of the people had influenced, and we'd worked with them on designing the car. It was designed by Pete Swingler, who's an IndyCar designer. Jackie Howarden was instrumental in it, and Eloise Garza actually made the body. It's all out of carbon. It's all out of carbon. My car seems quite a bit quieter than the conventional, just with the engine being covered. Itself, I can recall the first time we fired it, it sounded really different to me. And as far as the wind, it does go over my head, and I am at eye level with it, and I don't feel any of the wind.
Ormsby Streamliner did not have a glamorous debut at the Winter Nationals.
Well, we didn't leave enough clearance for the Magneto, and carbon fiber is the conductor. And when we stepped on the throttle, the engine raised just enough to ground the mag out, and it destroyed the supercharger and our body. It wasn't what we were hoping for. It was a little miscalculation on the clearance between the Magneto and the body. We're starting to get our power now, and the car actually, when it's hooked up, I really believe that the streamlining helps it. It keeps it glued into the track. I don't know, I'd say you can see some 520s and approach some 280 within the next year.
The very first thoughts of streamlining came from Indianapolis in 1984 when Art Malone, my partner, was down on the top end watching the cars come through, and he noticed after a rice ash cleanup, the funny cars would only move the ash about a foot in front of the cars, and yet the Top Fuel dragsters were all kicking the ash up at least 15 feet in front of the cars when they were running like 250 miles an hour. So we knew there was a tremendous wall of wind down there that the open wheels were generating on the Top Fuel dragster. So I began right then to develop some way to cover the front wheels. And as I worked on that program, I realized that the big front wheel was going to be very difficult to cover, and that's where we got the idea to build smaller wheels and make a much cleaner front end. So that's when we developed the 13-inch wheel. And the first ones had the belts on them, and that wasn't too effective. And then we molded some tires on them, and that worked real well, except it was rough in the shutoff. And then finally Goodyear came through with a little 515 aircraft type tire, and that was the answer. The car is so superior in handling with that, it's unbelievable. And then when I was in Brainerd in 1985, a bug hit me in the helmet right on the face shield at 260 miles an hour, and it was incredible, the impact. And I thought, if that had been a bird, it would have probably came right in the helmet with me, which could have blinded me. So I immediately started thinking about a canopy. And then as I built the canopy and we were doing the car and I kept looking at it, I figured there couldn't be near as much turbulence after I had done these things. So then we lowered the wing about a foot, which made less wind resistance. And of course that brought us to the present car, which we're very happy with performance.
Almost 20 years after he became the first person to go over 170, Garlits became the first person to break the 270 mile per hour barrier.
And to take it into the future a little bit, we're doing some wind tunnel work now on a quarter scale model to try to develop some coverings for the rear engine area and the tires, and that will be stage 2, and hopefully that would take us into the 280 mile an hour range.
The performance potential of the new Streamliners was amply displayed at the 1986 NHRA Cajun Nationals. On a difficult track under less than perfect conditions, Ormsby and Garlits were the class of the field. Their final round race marked the first all-Streamliner Top Fuel finale. Truly a historic moment for these new supercars. A few months later, at the NHRA Summer Nationals, Garlits again showed how far the new technology could go. During qualifying, he established a new national speed record of 271 miles per hour and ran the all-time quickest elapsed time of 5.34 seconds. There was, however, a dark side to Garlits' performance. On his last qualifying attempt of the weekend, Swamp Rat 30 left the line with the front wheels off the ground. Air got under the car and pushed the front end up until Garlits' Streamliner was literally standing on end. With all the excitement being generated by the new supercar technology, the future looks bright indeed for the kings of the sport.